Happy solar eclipse, everybody. What a day it is. Today is the day that astrologers around the world will tell you things to justify and solidify particular fears that you have, biases and dogmas that you have as well, regarding about the nature of the universe and how it works. Some founded in very illustrious traditions and ways of seeing the world. Others, maybe themselves rooted a bit more in fear. So today I wanted to share my own recommended practice of remediation for eclipses, for solar eclipses in particular, from that I've learned while being on my path as a Buddhist teacher. And I've taught this several different times. I also made a very large recommendation on the Threads app of what someone would do, as one of my students asked me, hey, what should one do during one of these eclipses? So, this video is going to get out after the eclipse, but, on these eclipse days, certain wisdom can get shared. And so we are going over solar eclipse remediation. We're going to be going over a practice one can do. I'm going to be giving a commentary on what it means and the wisdom that's in it. And then if one were to do a little digging on the sources and references within this text, which I have done, there's something deeper that's being taught. And that is probably the most important thing that we can learn or contemplate during the eclipse, and relates to, I think, some of the highest level teachings I've ever received when it comes to understanding the eclipse and the role of planetary magic, astrological magic, and how it affects us, just at the nature of reality, at a nature of reality level. And so to begin, I'm going to recite the Sutra of the Sun, which is a later translated sutra from the Kongyur. And you can find this on the 84,000 website. This is free to download. And in summary, what is this sutra or this story about? So this sutra is a Buddhist text, is a Buddhist story, which references a teaching that the Buddha gave. And this is Buddha Shakyamuni. And in this story, essentially what happens is that the sun is undergoing an eclipse. And the sun reaches out to Buddha for assistance with dealing with this eclipsing being, with Rahu, with the north node. And then we will see what happens. But that's the general narrative structure of this story. Respectful homage to the noble three jewels. Thus did I hear at one time. The Blessed One was dwelling in Sravasti, in Jeta's grove, in the Des Park. At that time the god Sūrya was seized by Rahu, lord of the Asuras. Then the god Sūrya, recollecting and taking the Blessed One to heart, recited this verse. I bow to the heroic Buddha. May you swiftly liberate all being. As I have come into confinement, I take refuge in you. Then the Blessed One, for the sake of the god Sūrya, addressed Rahu, lord of the Asuras, with this verse. Since Buddhas have compassion for the world, Sūrya took refuge in the worthy one, the Tathagata. Therefore Rahu, set the sun free. The sun, circle of mighty splendor, illuminates the darkness with light. Rahu, do not conceal the sun in the sky. Set this sun free, Rahu. Thereupon Rahu, lord of the Asuras, set the god Sūrya free and hurriedly, approaching Vemachitra, lord of the Asuras. He then sat to one side, displeased, agitated, and with all his body hairs bristling. Vemachitra, lord of the Asuras, now questioned Rahu, lord of the Asuras, in verse. Why, Rahu, did you release the sun in such fright? You are a very miserable sight. Why did you approach in fear? He replied, had I, hearing the Buddha's verse, not then released the sun, my head would have been split into 7 pieces, and my life would be without happiness. This concludes the Sutra of the Sun. So what is this all about? At the first level, well, what happened? The sun was getting eaten by Rahu. The sun took refuge in the Buddha, prayed to the Buddha, said, I take refuge in you, compassionate one. And then the Buddha, because he exists to give benefit to all sentient beings, he told Rahu, you must release the sun. And Rahu is so very much afraid that he did so. And so much so that even he was willing to release the sun, even if he was going to be ridiculed by his, fellow friend and lord of these asuras, of these ones who live in the darkness, kind of being. So functionally at the first level, it talks about that if we wanted to be shielded from the baleful rays, from the, malefic nature of an eclipse, one can go forth and take refuge in the Buddha. Take refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. The Buddha is the representation of the teachings of a path that liberates one through suffering. The Dharma, which is the teachings and methods themselves. And then last, the Sangha, or the community of practitioners, the people that have all agreed to, practice these methods and who align their lives with the goal of alleviating themselves through suffering, or alleviating suffering in their lives, and usually also the lives of other beings. So this is one level that it is being taught, that we can just directly, for one who takes refuge in the Buddha, the nodes are unable to have their effect. So you can go ahead and do that. Now, there's a couple other levels I'd like to discuss on this, because, and this piece of understanding probably requires a little bit more understanding and knowledge of the background of like the creation of Rahu and the creation of Ketu, creation of the lunar node. And the main thing is to understand is that, Rahu is bodiless and Ketu is headless. And so when the luminaries are getting eaten, as Sūrya discusses in this sutra, being overcome with this amount of fear and dread, this is kind of the experience that we all are forced to experience a little bit with the narratives of eclipses, and that people have always and traditionally felt during eclipses. So in the way that we become overcome with this fear and anxiety and this shock, we are to seek refuge in something. We are to take refuge in the confines of the sutra, take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. But I think it's also important to think about, the point of the Buddhist teachings are to just have a more accurate representation of the causes and conditions that we are being subject to in the world. And something that is also discussed in these traditions of the lunar nodes of eclipses between Rahu and Ketu. Rahu is eating the sun and the moon, but Rahu has no body. And that is why the eclipse happens, but then it finishes. It finishes because Rahu has no stomach or body in which to hold the things in which he's eating. So despite the fact that the light gets blotted out and the sattvic balancing powers of the luminaries are obscured, they're also destined to be relieved of their plight, whether one is doing something or not. And this really does speak to the ever-changing and impermanent nature of our world and of our existence. Matter is energy, and energy can't be created or destroyed. It's just changing form. And in this way, the state of the eclipsed luminary, the eclipsed sun or moon, isn't going to stay there forever. So at this time, there's lots of people who are going to recommend, there's all these prayers that one can do, there's all these mantras one can do, there's all these offerings that can be done at this time, which you definitely can do. And they do work, and they are helpful. But understanding the mechanism of, why they're helpful is also important. And thinking through the different mechanisms in which they work is also important. Is this just the thing that we are choosing to focus on, take refuge in at a given moment, space and time, in order to break through and get past a moment of supreme anxiety, pain, and distrust? And realistically, if you're doing a method of practice that allows you to get through that, get through being eaten by a celestial asura, then you can probably do it other times in your life that you are feeling a similar level of distraught anxiety, and it should work. So this is also something else to learn about and something else to think about. A final thing I wanted to mention was just that. A final thing I wanted to mention is that if you look through the sources that are listed, that this text is referencing, particularly the ones that have to do with Rahu and the structure of the universe, it refers to this other sutra, this other text, which gives you more of like a cosmological description of reality, talking about all the various islands that surround Mount Meru and the kinds of beings that exist in all these places. But they describe Rahu, and they describe Rahu quite differently than any other way I've heard them describe. And this is really the piece of information that I think makes the eclipse time truly special and, hides a little bit of the true nature of what can happen during an eclipse. Because it's also discussed quite prominently that during eclipses, one's mantra or spiritual practices get magnified 100,000 times, 1,000,000 times, even to the point to where this is the moment where people can become enlightened, they can become awakened. But what is the kind of thing that people are learning about. One will have to go into meditation and get to that. But I think we get a hint of this inside this sutra, inside this text, which describes Rahu as this asura, this very powerful, grotesque being who, in fact, just prefers to reside in the land that they reside. But there are astrologers and yogis and kings and people who believe that Rahu is creating all of these negative circumstances during the eclipse and that are causing all of these problems. And he doesn't do this. And this belief makes him so infuriated that he purposely causes bad karma and bad life circumstances to all of those who have this belief, which really is a devastating premise for astrologers and for those who want to advocate the need of performing any kind of remediation or caring or worrying about a specific eclipse. In the world of astrology and the world of astrological magic, there is a very strong truth, and it's a strong truth because this is true in every single domain of life, and that is people will choose their beliefs and actions merely on the basis of dogma and the belief that what they know or what they're being presented is correct and is right. And there's plenty of different ways, and there's plenty of different methodologies that people use to come across as correct and right, and plenty of different justifications people have for why they believe something is right or not. And I love this teaching, and I love this sutra, because it really forces those who care about eclipses, who are doing eclipse practice, to, at the very least, and I think most constructively, radically look at, why do I believe that this is even worth considering in my life? Why is it worth doing this practice? What is the fruit of the result? Is it making it easier to experience this incarnation, this actual embodied bodily life, or is it making it more difficult? Am I creating obstacles, and is it creating activities for me that are really just distracting from other areas of my life? Because at the end of the day, how are you proving to yourself that all of your eclipse woes aren't just because you have a belief that the eclipse causes woes? How does one particularly test and understand this? And this is really the majority of the remedy that I would like to give to folks and friends here on YouTube who are watching this and have made it this far. Because this is the line of thinking that, my gurus and teachers ultimately, at the end of the day, have encouraged me to think about in my life regardless. I have yet to meet somebody who has a perfect map of the mind of God, who can give you a direct, definite, and particular answer of how all of this works, of how astrology works, how astrological magic works. I think it's true both in the realms of spirituality and astrology, just like it is in business and mundane worlds of mundus, the world. The recommendation from an expert usually goes along the lines of, it depends. There is always a more nuanced and particular recommendation. There is always a particular line of thought and recommendation that can be given for you and your situation. To the degree that our realities are constructed, we can understand how to construct them in a way that is more conducive to our goals and the lives that we are looking to lead. And eclipses are really excellent times to do that. But if we are not reviewing and understanding the reasons why we are doing what we are doing, then we are destined to maybe at the worst fool ourselves and live in ignorance. And this depiction in the story of Rahu as being this fundamentally misunderstood being is, I think, an important one to consider. Because what is it that makes us believe in that story or not? And what are the underpinnings of our worldview that are preventing us to believe that narrative versus the alternative narrative and really the majority narrative that gets talked about all the time during an eclipse? What do we gain and what do we lose by believing one and not the other? And I would argue it's understanding these points and being able to not just think and theorize about them, but live our lives according to these various different patterns. Potentially, see if you can do it. See if you can live contradictory patterns at the same time and see which different results they create in one's mind and in one's life, that we gain a better and deeper understanding of what this whole corpus of knowledge and discussion is when it comes to astrology and astrological magic and eclipses. Gosh, I wanted to end it there, but like another example of this and counterpoint is there's so much discussion about how eclipses are such terrible times. They're awful, they're horrible, all these different things. They're foreboding of terrible events. And I think some of the most compelling and powerful descriptions of this have to do with like looking at the electional astrology of, I believe it is the fall of Constantinople, and which happened during an eclipse and was timed during an eclipse. And there's really excellent electional astrological evidence for this. And it's talking about, how terrible of a time it was. But like, yes, it's terrible from the perspective of the fall of Constantinople. I don't know if it was necessarily bad, consider like you would describe it as bad and terrible for the one who actually won the battle. Like for them, it was like quite excellent. And so to have these celestial moments be described in such like dogmatic, black and white, good, bad terms sometimes misses the point. I don't particularly think a destruction of a city is a good thing. Yes, immense amounts of suffering, but not all battles throughout history and time, even in today, are concluded or happen during an eclipse. So this is also an important point to consider. But I hope I provided some good food for thought for everybody, and I will see everyone during the next chat.